Hey, what's up?
Oh yeah, I'm excited about this. We talked about doing this a while back, and it's probably my fault. I'm terrible at looking at my emails. It never really happened. Yeah, what's going on? How you doing? First, you can introduce yourself, plug your channel, all of that good stuff. I'm sure more will be joining us as we get into this, but we'll definitely have some more on the playback as well.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me on. And my channel name is Snake Was Right, and it kind of just stands for, well, it's a reference to the biblical snake and how it's basically knowledge is kind of worth the pain that it takes to get knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's I kind of try to tackle topics that are a bit that sting a bit to know the truth of, and that's kind of what I try and do on the channel, and mostly atheism and a little bit of some politics, which I think is what might bring us here today.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
yeah,
was just kind of telling the chat. We always seem to be somewhat on the same side when it comes to the theist debates. I was shocked to learn um, some of your politics, and yeah, I think that's kind of what. I might have been in a side chat talking smack one night, and that might be what led to this conversation.
yeah,
So I guess I'll start. Yes, because I've brought it up with a couple people, and they always kind of had the same reaction that I had in my first. When I first kind of heard some of your politics, was like, wow, or this is crazy. Like I would have never thought it. I guess my first question would be, are you still a Trump supporter even now? And secondly, have you always been a Republican? Because I think that's an important question to start off on.
well, I've never been a Republican. I'm not a Republican.
Oh, that's
I'm
good. See,
not. Yeah.
illusions blown.
So yeah, so it's I kind of walk a fine line, which is where a lot of people get confused. I get called far right winger a lot, and by the right wing, I get called a lefty libtard, such things. And I identify as a libertarian, so and and a capitalist. So capitalism, I guess, is kind of on the right wing, but um, I really don't like conservatives, and I don't like Republicans. Never have liked them. Um, but I have come to dislike Democrats, which is possibly where a lot of confusion comes from. I've never really been a Trump supporter. I've always thought he's kind of uh, a villain, but I think that he's really no different from the rest of them. I think that our other presidents are also villains, so that's also
Well,
uh,
I would definitely probably agree with you there. I don't consider myself a Democrat, and yeah, so already my misconceptions are blown, and I think maybe you might have been talking up a particular Trump policy at the time. I can't remember; it was a while ago. The
yeah.
context of what was being said, so maybe I just assumed you. And that's I think the good thing about these conversations. Yeah, I don't consider myself a Democrat anymore. I probably have a lot of the same issues with the Democratic Party that you would. And So I kind of understand that. Libertarianism, though, I think I consider that right wing as well. And I think it depends on if you're a big L libertarian or a small L libertarian on how far I would place you on that spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, I just consider myself a liberty or freedom is my fundamental value, and um, so my understanding of right wing is kind of it, it would be the acceptance or promotion of the idea that I guess differences or hierarchies are either natural or desirable, and then the left wing would be essentially those political ideologies that try to stop those hierarchies and differences from disenfranchising people. So I don't think that either one is inherently good or bad, because I think that there are differences between people as simple as just like levels of talent. and I don't think that I think that hierarchies are both natural and desirable. I don't think you can get rid of them. Um, but I do recognize that they can become authoritarian and become oppressive. So I consider myself maybe a mix or a centrist in that way, but I don't really like left or right wing distinctions. I'm more of a authoritarian or libertarian. So it's either oppressive or freedom values that I'm mostly concerned with, and I think libertarian is the best label for that. Yeah,
Yeah, that's,
I used to be. Oh, I used to be pretty far left, like communist, and I'm now very anti-communist. So, um,
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think it would depend on what you call communist. I think that they vary.
yeah.
I don't even notice like all the different ways in which they or I don't even really know in all the different ways in which they vary now. Um, I take a different more I guess just a when I think of libertarian, um, I think of the Libertarian Party that usually aligns with the left. I think there's sometimes that liberals and libertarians can find common ground. I know I have some very libertarian stances still to this day, even though I consider myself a socialist. I'm very anti-capitalist, um, and but I consider myself a new socialist. Like I'm still like looking into it. I'm trying to discover like, all right, so I think I'm a socialist now. What does that entail? I've always kind of labeled myself progressive before that. Something beyond a liberal. I'm like no longer a liberal Democrat anymore. I left the Democratic Party, but I'm definitely anti-capitalist. So yeah, I mean, this kind of I had pretty much planned because I assumed that Trump support. So for one, let me congratulate you that you're not a dumbass Trumper, because I thought that you were. And two, I was gonna like totally just go through Trump's policies, I guess we would call them, just some of the worst aspects of it. So I'm not gonna hijack you with that. And we can kind of try to differentiate maybe some of our differences because you say you don't like Democrats, and I think that we might have a lot of the same reasons. So like maybe tell me what you don't like about the Democratic Party, maybe where they've gone from where you were when you were on the left and would have liked to see them go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll point out that I often find myself defending Trump, not that I want to, but I find that if you're going to criticize someone, you need to have a good criticism, and I think most of the criticism is just like kind of a religion on its own. But that played in a little bit on my dislike of Democrats because it seemed like they were using the media in a very Orwellian way, trying to control narratives and tell people what to think. But I was already far down the path of basically hating all politicians by the time 2016 rolled around and the subsequent years.
All right,
So
well, let me stop you right there because you said like the Democrats using media. Now, I think definitely probably some of the things reported about Trump were sensationalized, but I think that was Trump's fault, and I don't think Democrats had anything to do with it. Trump, when he first got into office, he waged war on the media immediately. I remember writing a tweet and a Facebook post about it. Like, holy crap, Trump just declared war with CNN, and now all shit's gonna hit the fan. Or like I remember writing that like day 3 of his presidency when he came out and just started talking smack about CNN, started talking smack about mainstream media. Like the only party that I can really see observe, if you will, directly trying to influence media would be the Republican Party. The Republican Party has Fox News as their propaganda outlet, not to mention Newsmax and all of those sources now. But they've always had a stranglehold on radio as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like Fox News or anything like that. I would say that Trump attacking the media was one of the positive traits of Trump because I think that the media are manipulative and mostly, well, it goes back to my main criticism, which I haven't gotten to yet, which is that they're all basically covering up for the military-industrial complex, which I think both parties are complicit in. And this whole political system is just basically a corrupt money-making process based on war. And both sides of the media are there to cover it up and to divert our attention and to, just to distract us from what's really going on. And I as far as that goes, I see both parties as basically one party with a couple of minor wedge issues to keep people divided that they don't actually care about, like basically abortion and a certain percentage on like welfare is like the main real differences. But behind the scenes, they're waging war for profit, and that's my main concern.
I mean, I definitely agree with you. You know, you definitely have your neocons and your neolibs. That's for sure. You definitely have both members of both parties kind of selling out to the industrial military complex, selling out to the donor class. Without a doubt, like I agree with you there, but I think that there is a distinct difference. Democrats often cut the military. Democrats, lesser of two evils argument for sure, because like if I had my way, in my opinion, the military would be drastically cut farther than anybody would be willing to go. But that's just me. But I think that there's definitely a distinction. Like you can't really see the two as the same. Now, like I'm kind of behind you. Like if it comes to the donor class, I think that both sides do it, and I would definitely like to see more, I don't know, activists take roles of leadership instead of career politicians. But there's definitely a distinction, especially when it comes to war. Democrats are usually not for war unless oil's involved, which it's usually pretty easy to get on board then. And I do think that most Democrats still have a religious persuasion, so they tend to vote certain ways on certain things. But there's like this definite distinction. Like one of the main reasons I stopped being a Republican and became a Democrat was because I became anti-war during the first, not the first Iraq War, but George W. Bush's Iraq War. After shock and awe, I really that's kind of what really pushed me. Like I can't be a Republican anymore. I can't support these people committing these war crimes. And there, yes, there was Democrats that definitely went along with that, but there was staunch Democrats that didn't. And the Democratic Party usually does kind of entail that anti-war element of the country. I think a lot of us are turning against the Democratic Party just because of their corruption, but I think that that's on both sides. But like back to the media and like Trump, I would agree that like if Trump had done it genuinely or done it in the right way, it would have been the right thing. Trump did it for very selfish reasons. He did it for propaganda, and he did it so he could kind of just like lie at will. And every time he lied, he could just say, well, that's fake news. That's fake news. And doing it in a very clumsy way, what it has done is turn people away from the more accurate news. And kind of funneled them into these really extreme right-wing websites where they're just not getting any accurate news at all.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. He's been any positive trait or goal that he sets, he pretty much bungles and is not very effective. Partially because he is so abrasive, I think there is a little bit of obstruction going on. But I think if he was more articulate and he was more just, I guess, precise, he's obviously not well read or well educated.
I just realized that might have sounded like I farted, but like I'm just twisting my drink here, being fidgety. So I don't know if that came through. Like, man, why is he farting? Just twisting my drink.
No, I didn't notice.
All right.
But yeah. Yeah, he's just kind of a goofball, to put it lightly. And so if you're not 100% on the Trump train, it's hard to take him seriously. And he ostensibly holds like anti-media, anti-political opinions, which I think are good things, but he doesn't apply them well. Like if he had, for instance, pardoned Julian Assange or uh, any of the people suffering political oppression by our own country, um, that would have been something genuine and showed he would knew what he was talking about. And but I think that either he's weak and he's been threatened by the CIA and whoever wants Assange still in prison, or he's not clued into the real issues that are going on. And I like I was saying, I don't think he's well read. I think he just watches Fox News and gets his opinions from there.
Well, see, that's where I differ because I don't think he's a goofball. I actually think he's very smart. I think he's been manipulating media for his entire career, and I think like when we go back to like because we were talking about like how the media had this natural repulsion. I would actually maintain that it probably started before that. Before that moment when like he actually came out and like just declared war on CNN. Like I literally still can't believe that moment. I'm like, that's not the way you go about this, But like even before that, like the whole grab him by the whatever comment. I think that probably really shocked a lot of people that a presidential candidate would say something like that, get away with it, and then become president, like survive that. But like even outside, like I think most people's problems with Donald Trump started a long time ago when you had the birther conspiracy that Donald Trump started, very racist birther conspiracy that Donald Trump started, and the Central Five. And it would be one thing like with the Central Park Five if he had made his statements and then backtracked when the time came. But even after the Central Park Five were cleared on DNA evidence and the actual perpetrator of the crime came out and confessed, he doubled down, and so I think, when you have an individual like that, people and even organizations even will have a natural reaction to such a person claiming what could be argued as the most power in the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean he's a genius at getting media attention, for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But I think he just kind of like with the Central Park Five. I don't mean to start another debate, but I'm of the opinion that they're all guilty.
See, I don't see how you could be
there
that,
was. I mean, it's a whole other debate, but there was other DNA found. It just wasn't as high quality. The process by which they had the case thrown out was weird. It was just I think the governor just threw it out. Just it wasn't actually like a full legal process. And the fact that one guy's semen was found at the crime scene doesn't exclude anyone else, and all of them admitted it. They confessed on tape, and the interrogator, nice lady, told them up front, is anyone coercing you? Tell me. We don't want you to confess falsely. She was being very explicit about how false confessions work and that she did not want them to do it, and they confessed anyway.
That happens all the time, though. Have you ever been in a criminal interrogation?
Not really in like a jail.
It's very intimidating. It's you. I mean, when you're young and you don't have really the capacity to, I don't know, defend yourself, and these very authoritative figures are looming over you, and especially if you're a minority in this country and you already have good reason to fear those authority figures. Oftentimes false confessions happen. But my point is, yes, the semen was found, but not only that, but the perpetrator ultimately confessed, right?
He did, and he was. I mean, there's suspicious circumstances around that. He was in the same ward as one of the originally accused, and there was no way he was going to get released. And like, there's a lot of the one who got released was like the leader of the gang at the prison, and There's a lot of stuff. I mean, we could probably talk about it later because I don't have all the
Oh, yeah,
details of it
and I don't have.
memorized.
Neither do I. Like if
Yeah.
I was at home, I'd have my notes because, like, yeah,
Yeah.
before I ever became the raging atheist, I was doing political YouTube. I never took off, but I do have a bunch of notes from debates that I had on the Central Park Five.
Yeah. I mean, I just bring it up to point out like there's some issues that seem to people like, oh well, it's so obvious, and then but it might be a little more gray than you think if you look into the details. But the media will just repeat ad nauseum, and so you think you hear this from the authority figures. Oh, that they've been exonerated. There's nothing else to see here. When there might be a little more to look into it. I could be wrong. I'm just convinced in this particular case. And I mean, there's a lot of these police shootings that I don't agree with the mainstream, but a lot of them obviously are. Like I'm like the murder of George Floyd. I'm 100% Chauvin is guilty. I was glad he was in jail. But at the same time, I think we need to be responsible with these cases where what was her name, Makaya, who she was about to get stabbed, and the police officer shot the girl who was going to stab her. I think that's probably a justified shooting. So I'm just saying I think we need to be
Well, yeah, and
responsible with
there's going to be overreaction, sure, but
yeah.
like the majority of these that they say people are overreacting to, there just is no overreaction. I mean, I think that it's like it's fairly undeniable if you look at the numbers per capita, not the overall numbers, that systematic racism is a thing. There's definitely an issue. You know, I'm not one of these ACAB people. All cops are bastards. I don't believe that. I think a lot of cops are good cops. I wish that they would speak up and do more to rein in the bad cops. But I think that we definitely see systematic oppression from the police. I mean, I'll take this for instance. We don't even have to use black people, but the No Dapple protest. Peaceful actions, never any violence proven, although they've tried to frame a lot of people for being violent within that protest. Nothing's ever been proven. Most, if not all of the detainees at this point have been set free. But the police just literally attacked American citizens, Native Americans, brutally and without remorse, using tactics that they were using in the Iraq insurgency. Over in Iraq. I mean, so like there's definitely systematic brutality within police forces. And I think within any institution that has authority like that, you're going to draw in these narcissists or even sometimes psychopaths. And a lot of what we're asking for is just more detailed mental screening of police officers, more training. Most countries, it takes sometimes as long as 2 years to become a police officer because of all the training. Here, it takes 6 months. You know, like cops working the beat again, getting to know the people that they're supposed to be serving and protecting. You know, there's a lot of issues with police forces that I think that, you know, sometimes some certain individual cases will be blown out of proportion, but that needs to happen because the cases need to be talked about on a national level. And far too often, the CNNs of the world, they're not going to talk about it, just like Fox News isn't going to.
Yeah,
They
and
do more now. The Trump era really kind of changed that dynamic with like CNNs and MSNBCs of the world.
yeah, I kind of actually am more towards the ACAB side of things, which, so, like, I'm a mixed bag. Like if I defend any shooting, I'll get called like a right winger. But then, like, I'm very anti-police. Like, I am lean anarchist,
Which
like very
would,
strongly.
which would be libertarian as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I think
I think,
libertarians want to privatize police. They don't necessarily want to get rid of all of them.
well, I mean, they think, well, it's more that we give them too much power, and it's inherently
Yeah,
too
and
much power.
I agree with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. So while there are police who are good people and are not malicious in intent or even what they do, I think a lot of it, they'll essentially back up other police officers, which I think actually is changing. But
It's starting to a little bit, I think. But like I said, I
yeah,
would still like the good cops to be a lot more vocal than they are. Because it does get hard to
yeah,
like, is there any good cops out there? Really, I do hear what you're saying.
yeah. But I think the problem is more systemic. Like if the governor or whoever says put down the riot or put down the protest, they'll just do it. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
and I mean, they'll quit, but then whoever takes up the badge next is just gonna do it anyway. I think the problem is our society trusting police and giving them way too much power. I think, and part of that is uh, they shouldn't be going on mental health calls, and um, they definitely shouldn't be doing no knock raids. I mean, that's what is a reasonable person going to do if their door gets knocked in? You're not
Yeah.
going to wait and
You,
check if it's a cop.
especially as armed as this country is, you're going to naturally reach for that protection. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's completely unreasonable.
I'm totally with you on these points. See, I think that we put way too many people in prison. I think that our cops have way too much power. I am for a complete overhaul of the justice system and
Mhm.
national police as a whole.
Well, and that's one reason why I refused to vote for Joe Biden is it was instrumental in the crime bill, which has instituted a lot of minimum sentencing laws and harsh crackdowns in the drug war,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
the whole drug war is a mess.
along those lines, and yeah, like I don't take away Joe Biden's. Joe Biden, I think he's gotten better. When I say better, like kind of, he's come farther to the left than he was, especially like during the Clinton days when he was responsible for the crime bill you're talking about. Um, Without a doubt, Democrats have played their part, but also without a doubt, I think you can't deny that it's actually the Republican parties that are propping up police forces, the party of law and order, right? Like, see, I mean, that's kind of one
Oh
of the
yeah,
things that would confuse me about it all. Is sure, I think that Democrats are complicit, but like if we're talking, who's the lesser of two evils, especially on this issue, that's again definitely Democrats.
well, yeah, it's definitely for this issue, and that's why I am not a conservative. And
Yeah,
anytime
and
I
the
say,
fact that I have
well,
to keep saying the lesser of two evils, it's just like yes, that's
yeah,
why I'm not a Democrat anymore.
yeah, well,
Uh,
and it's kind of like, yeah, maybe the lesser of two evils, but still two evil.
yeah,
Um,
I would agree with
uh,
that. I think that it's why like the reason I left the Democratic Party was just not only what was going on the national scale, but just the corruption that I saw in them, just here in my local Democratic Party. Because I was very involved with them. I was going down to the office. I was participating. Know all of them, and I just saw it, just like the hypocrisy every day. They don't really stand for what they say they stand for, and
mhm.
just the privilege and the arrogance and the just I am better than every. I couldn't stand it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Democrats probably have mostly better rhetoric, and ostensible positions, but I don't think the majority of the politicians, the voters, agree with this stuff. But I don't think the majority of the politicians actually hold these positions or even care. I think they just are essentially virtue signaling. They don't really have principles. They're just like, I think this is popular and I'm going to run with it so I can get votes and power. And that's about as far as they really care about the issue.
I mean, yeah, I totally can get down with that. Sure, Nancy Pelosi would come to mind. I mean, pretty much all of the establishment Democrats are what I would consider really, really weak, not activist. I mean, I think we do have a few more activists now, and the hopes, the revolution that's going on within the left. Hopefully, the right side will win, and we'll have more activists take active leadership. But at the same time, just in the same regards, though, like Republicans are far worse. They're supposed to be fiscal conservatives, but they don't care about that. They platitude or they placate a base. And really are just willing to lie about everything, like again here it seems like Democrats in what we're talking about here again lesser of two evils. Most Democrats do actually care about it, but they will bend to their donors, and they'll usually bend to the donors that are like the CEOs of these issues, like Green Party or Green Technology, a lot of different things, and then they'll be beholden to a lot of the same donors that the right wing will. Like Silicon Valley would definitely be more left wing type donors. So like I think they're the same on that, but like Republicans, like Mitch McConnell, right? Like doesn't appear to stand for anything. Just willing to pretty much be this way and then blatantly another way when his party's in power. And at least it seems to me, again, when we're talking about this, that Democrats are the lesser of two evils here. That the ones that really blatantly just don't give a fuck about principle would be the Republican Party, to where the establishment even will try to placate to where their base is at. They're not going to give us anything we want, but they'll placate to us, and I think the right does the same thing, but it's just their base is practically all fascist now. Like the perfect example of this would be Mitch McConnell going against Neil Gorsuch and then supporting Amy Coney Barrett, and then now he's saying, well, if Joe Biden gets a nominee in his last year, he's going to block that. And the way he just blocked, the voter rights bill, when actually most of what's in that bill is pretty much what they just passed in Georgia. There was some very leftist things in there as well, but there was also some very good things, like, attacking Citizens United. It would have been the first real attack on Citizens United by our government, which is something that I think is desperately needed if we want democracy back.
Yeah, and I don't think, and I think that the Democrats are happy to let that part of the bill get obstructed. I don't.
Yeah, so do I. I'm right
hear
there
them
with
complain
you.
too much.
I'm surprised it was even in the thing.
Yeah, I think sometimes. Well, there's a couple good senators or Congress people, and things slip by, but then they depend on each other to obstruct each other. But I was going to say, I think one of the few positives about Trump was his base. He rallied them to be sort of anti-war, which I thought was a positive step for the Republican Party. And he was the first president who was pro LGBTQ before he was president. Now, as far as what he did, and
sort of anti-war, though, he didn't like they cheered, and like I can't tell you how many conversations I've been on this. Like when he dropped Moab, right? Just to see how it glittered. Like these same people that are now anti-war was like, hell yeah, just kill all them innocent people.
Well, yeah, it's paper thin. He didn't. He used the discontent with the never-ending wars.
Yeah,
I doubt he really cares.
He stole a lot of Bernie people with that crap that he spit.
He wouldn't ever be able to articulate any principles of, okay, why is this bad, and where is it heading? He just is kind of using the issue. So it's a positive, but not really, because he can't follow through with any of it. He didn't really end any of the wars.
But and like if you really think about it, because he did kind of turn them slightly anti-war for a moment, but then like he turned them uber nationalist to the point where they're willing to commit war against America. So I mean it's like I understand, like a lot of people saw things in Trump that I really don't see, and I think maybe this is the confusion that I had when I first started hearing some of your commentary on Trump, because I look at him and I see nothing good, and I can usually find some decent things about Republican presidents. I'm not a big George Bush fan, but I remember how he used to really try to bring the Republican Party to be more accepting of Latinos and Mexicans, because he saw that as a possible base for his party. And, he was kind of laughed at about that for a while. But, like, there's just nothing really that I can find good about Trump. And what's scary about it is, like, people that follow him, everything is great. And even people that are more sympathetic, because they've come to despise Democrats, and not like I don't really want to take that away from you because I think Democrats have earned your disdain. But at the same time, I think we have to look at these things very, very fairly. And when you place like the Democratic Party compared to what the Republican Party is trying to do, it's like, again, it's that lesser of two evil things. I want like me personally, I just want to blow that up. I want to have like 20 different damn parties. You know, like I want people to have actual choice and actually get invested in politics because, you know, what they believe and their political framework is actually represented in government.
Yeah, it's the two-party system is a major problem because you don't have to actually stand in it for anything. All you have to do is convince someone that the other side is a nut job and you're the only other option. So I think a major way to do that is, well, the ranked choice voting is a really good idea. Are you familiar with that? How that works?
Yeah, I'm a little bit. I'm somewhat familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it would allow people to start voting for third parties and stuff like that without feeling like they've wasted their vote, because if not enough people vote for the third party anyway, your vote just goes to your next top choice anyway. So you haven't. I don't believe in wasting votes, but you do know one of the two parties is going to win, at least at the presidential level. So I've done third party votes as kind of just a protest vote. But the ranked choice voting would allow people to feel more comfortable. You can give your vote to the third party without losing the opportunity to vote for one of the major parties as well, because it just carries over if they don't get enough votes. Yeah. And then I think the other thing is kind of the media stranglehold, because they ridicule any third parties. I've voted Green Party before. I've voted Libertarian before. And I mean, they ridicule the Green Party as like hippies, and the Libertarians as, I mean, Gary Johnson didn't help the Libertarians too much, but
yeah, no, he really didn't. And you know, like on my side, you know, I try to get behind the Green Party. You know, Stein, she had me for a brief moment. Not when she ran for president, but back in the day. They get a little too crazy with it for me, and again, like I'm still trying to figure out where my stuff is, but I definitely want the Green Party to have a better chance. I would like the Libertarian Party to have a better chance. I would like there to be a big L libertarian and a small L libertarian. You know, I'd like there to be a true representation of socialism, a true representation of what we call communism. I don't think that there's ever really been a real communist in the history of the world. A real communist regime, you know, political faction. Can there even be a communist political faction? Philosophy for you, I don't know.
Well, I would say no, but because it's doomed to fail.
I would say no, because there's no state or within true communism, right? There's no government, there's no state.
That's the idea, but you and I are going to disagree on
this. That's the pipe dream, right? That's the pipe
dream. Yeah.
You know, yeah, you know, I always said, like, I can't be a communist because, you know, the human race needs another 10,000 years for that. You know, it's going to take us a long time to get there. But, you know, that being aside, just trying to understand what I am myself. And, you know, like, I'm trying to come to terms that if voting for the lesser of two evils is even the right thing to do. You know, like, I've fought against it ruthlessly in 2016 when a lot of Bernie people weren't going to vote for Hillary. You know, I fought more with Democrats in that period after Trump won than I did actual Republicans. But now I'm almost like kind of switched, because I think that the more we kind of give in to these lesser of two evils, the more entrenched the establishment gets.
Yeah, it's the trap that they've set up. I think that they play off each other. because one of each other is always going to win, and that they can
Yeah.
just kind of get, like you said,
And
entrenched.
I am kind of right there with you. Like I definitely think like when the cameras are off and nobody's watching, they're going to the bar in DC, they're having drinks and they're laughing at the schlebs that believed all the bullshit that they just heard. Like I totally think that that's a
Mhm.
reality.
Yeah, I think they're in the same club, and they have more in common with each other than either party has with their own voters. At least at the elite level.
Mm.
I'm not really talking about the voters at all. Um, yeah, I think. Going back a little, I think that I kind of try and look at Trump more without trying to get angry. Like, I see it more as like a case study of like, okay, how did we even get here?
I'm
Because
starting
it
to
is
get there.
absurd. It's completely absurd, and I mean, it's the best evidence for simulation theory that we have, I think.
I agree with that,
Um,
man. Like I said, like that whole just the the tape that came out, the Inside Hollywood tape. You know, it's
mhm.
just like, you know, for anybody else in the history of this country, end of any chance of winning that presidency, and it seems like
Yeah.
somehow that's like what propelled him to overcome the odds and beat Hillary Clinton.
Well, yeah, and I think it's because people, they might not be able to articulate even at the level that we're talking about, which is pretty beginner level as it is.
Mm, yeah.
But they almost everyone knows that politicians are full of it, and even the media, even people who trust CNN think, sometimes, yeah, they're giving me a load of crap. But they know that the game is basically rigged, and Trump was really the only outlet for that. And that, as paper thin and ineffective at actually making good on the promises as he was the only one really that people could see as he was the only one willing to talk about going against the establishment. He didn't really do it,
Oh yeah,
but
he definitely
that's
sold out
kind of
to the Republican establishment, or he tried to get the Republican establishment to sell out to him. I think he ended up winning
mm,
that battle. I really do. Like he is the Republican Party now. But like,
yeah.
like this issue of media again. Like I'll go back to that. Like, like before Trump ever came along, there was those of us that were talking about the problems with the media, yeah, and we weren't just delegating it to Fox News. Although I think a lot of the rhetoric was surrounding Fox News, just because Fox News is definitely of all the mainstream medias the most inaccurate one, and probably the one that's filled with the most propaganda. Now, my issue with like the CNNs of the world has always been. That they're oligarchy news. Like they've kind of given up on being true news people for the money, for capitalism, for CNN's owned by Time Warner. Like that's old money in this country, like
Well,
power, like so
and for
and
access,
yeah, access.
if you run a
Yeah.
bad story about someone, they won't give you an interview again.
Yeah. That whole play at both sides, like that drove us crazy. Like because I kind of grew up watching CNN, but that was back when like everybody was watching CNN. Nobody was. I mean, Fox News was like a brand new thing, and back then, I remember thinking even back then, it's like you're calling it both ways. You're not really calling it truth. Like I think they should call truth to both sides. Call out the Democrats for being inconsistent in their positions. Oh, you say that you're for climate change. Well, what about this, and this, and this? Because like they literally placate about climate change and have done literally nothing about it, and have tried to laugh AOC out of the party for trying to do something about it. It's like the inconsistency there and the hypocrisy there. But like I definitely think like just giving legitimacy to some of the right wing talking points and calling it even, that has done a lot of damage to this country. I think. And then when Trump came along, though, it really hurt a lot of us that have been arguing against this mainstream media for the long time, because he did it for the wrong reasons, and he did it to weaponize it and to turn his base against what was going to be his opposition, basically the people that were going to try to be somewhat honest about the things that he was doing in office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like with the media, it's kind of an effect where once you realize that you've been lied to once, it's like I can't turn that off anymore. Like now I'm just suspicious all the time.
Oh yeah.
And
I don't trust
and
anything
same
any of them tell me, really. Like
yeah.
I'll take it and then I'll go and try to find what I can find and corroborate it through like a bunch of different sources. I don't trust none of them anymore.
Yeah. And like with the Democrats, like yeah, once you hear one lie, it sticks with you. And I felt like the Democrats were my side, and I felt it was like almost a personal betrayal. It's like that's why seem to tend to go after the left and Democrats harder, because it's like that was my side, and
Mm.
I feel betrayed. I was never a conservative and or a Republican, and so it's like yeah, I already don't like them. It's like it's nothing new to me.
Yeah,
Um,
and I can definitely understand that. Like I remember, like when the evidence first came out about them cheating Bernie in 2016. I mean,
mhm.
I just wanted to burn all bridges. Like, screw you guys.
Yeah,
I was so angry. And
yeah.
then,
It's like
like,
if
they basically did the same thing in 2020, but they just used different tactics at how they went
yeah,
about it. And it's just like,
I'm
you're never gonna change, so I can understand the feeling of betrayal that you're talking about.
yeah, like I'm always gonna hold my side, like my friends
Mm.
or family or myself, to a higher standard than the enemy, so to speak, because it's like, yeah, I already know that you're gonna like be a failure, and so and it's the side I'm closer to, so it's like I don't know how to articulate it.
I,
It's just like
I think I
you're
understand now.
closer to me. I can bring you less distance back to sanity, you know.
Yeah, I think I understand now, and that makes sense. That makes sense because, like, when I was listening to you, like I said, like I had this assumption that you was probably raised a Republican. This is something that like your parents passed down to you, and like I couldn't cross it in my brain. Like, this guy is so smart. Like he knows philosophy, he knows science, and like it seems like he's just kind of been sucked into, and this is like the one thing that left that he hasn't given up yet. But this brings understanding to me because I can totally understand what you're talking about. I understand feeling betrayed by the Democratic Party once I realize just how freaking hypocritical they are and how they really stand for nothing. It's eye opening, and you're right. You can't forget it once you know it to be true. Um, the route I went and the route that I'm still fighting here inside the party in Michigan with what allies that I have left is trying to change that from the inside. um, and that's been like, pounding your head on a brick wall for 20 years. It does get very
Yeah.
tiring and very frustrating. So I think I have a better understanding. And you're like, when it comes to Trumpers, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful in any means to anybody that follows Trump, but like I can understand it when it's a redneck hillbilly down in Tennessee having sex with his cousin. But when it's some like really smart guy that's super intelligent, I'm like, but now I think I have a better understanding. I really do. It's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm sympathetic to the average Trump supporter because I mean, they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like
Totally. Yeah.
forgive them for their ignorance, but it's because they're sensing that something is wrong with the system, and this is the only outlet that they know to turn to. It's not a good one, but I sympathize with that itching to change something. But I
Hmm.
think it's to the point where you like I don't think you can change it from the inside, because it's like no matter how good your intentions are, if you get in on the inside, you can't progress if you have good intentions, because you always have to compromise to get
Yeah.
the approval of the entrenched corruption at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you can even see that, with what progressives we did manage to get elected into power. Like
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely been a change with AOC. Now, whether or not that's ultimately a negative change, I haven't decided yet because I still think she's farther left than anybody in the establishment Democrat class, but like definitely not the activist that I met the one time I got to meet her back when I was in Standing Rock. But yeah, so I definitely think power corrupts, and I definitely, I mean, that is something that I'm coming to the conclusion. I remember like when Bernie first lost, and we were starting to figure that out. I argued against forming a socialist party, or a democratic socialist party, and now I'm wishing that more of us would have argued for it, and we would have broken away from the Democratic Party and did our own thing, because I think ultimately what you're saying right now is correct. You're just going to end up bashing your head against that wall repeatedly until you're dead, and nothing's ever really going to change. And I think that this is probably the one thing that Trumpers and farther left people can get behind, is that ultimate distrust of the government. I think that the Trumpers, I think that it was weaponized against them in a negative way. But if we can find some ground, and unfortunately, liberals are demonized so much for them that they could never possibly work with liberals. But like on this one issue and not trusting the government and wanting fundamental change, we do agree. We might not agree what that change should be, but we definitely agree we don't trust our politicians, and we want this country to change. Like the status quo isn't working.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's one reason why Trump was such a great FU is, I mean, that's the main thing he was. Like most people recognize his flaws and the fact,
Oh yeah,
he's rude.
He was a response to Barack Obama.
Yeah, well,
definitely.
Well, even his voters will say he's not articulate. He's not particularly well versed in the details. He's rude. He's immoral. But he wasn't supposed to win, says the elites. And so that's good enough for them, because it's just a massive FU to the system, because you wanted the other guy to win. Well, guess what? We're just going to upset you just to spite you. That's, well, I think that was a lot of at least the initial impetus behind it.
And what honestly scares me about that giant FU to the system is it an FU to the system that is bringing equality and change? And I think that's primarily what it was. Sure, there are your minorities that are Trumpers. I know plenty of Mexicans. Like I've argued till I'm blue in the face with, and I'm like, how can you, like, how you of anybody, but that's just, I think that's the dangerous thing about it is it's an FU to the progression we're making. And they label it as, screw the liberal or cancel culture sucks. But ultimately, it's the progression, the acceptance of gay people. For a lot of these people, the acceptance of black people still, definitely, without a doubt. Not all Trumpers are racist, but he definitely played on those racial lines without a doubt throughout his entire presidency.
Well, I think it's kind of like a Rorschach test where you can see whatever you want in it. And I think there is a common element of just utter rebellion, but the specific reason, yeah, it's distrust of government, but everyone's going to have a different thing that they dislike. And
well, but I mean, I think I don't really think there's no denying that he played to the white supremacist element in our society. That's what I think I'm trying to say. And this is the thing that a lot of Trumpers try to run away from, but I don't see how you can. Like I mentioned the Criminal Park 5, the Central Park 5, but like telling the squad to, quote, go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, when all of them are United States citizens, calling the white supremacists in Charlottesville very fine people, telling the Proud Boys to stand by everything he's ever said about Elizabeth Warren and Ilhan Omar, enlisting foreign officials to help his candidacies. There's so much about that was a different point, so ignore that last one. But like when it comes to just playing along those racial lines, this is something that Republicans accuse Democrats and the left of doing. But they're the ones that are actually doing it. Like Trump actually, for the last 4 years, placated to the white supremacy and the fear of diversity that's in the country. And he stirred up a lot of shit there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to play too croquet, but I mean, Joe Biden has said very similar things about crime. So it's not like that it excuses the the talk about crime, because I think that the way we go about crime
I mean,
is very wrong here.
like the
But
comment that
I
gets
think it's
associated with that crime bill is often referred to Hillary Clinton. Like what things that, like Joe Biden is the king of gaffe, putting his foot in
yeah.
his mouth. But
I mean, I only bring it up.
it's not equatable. Like when you're talking directly to white supremacists and not caring who hears, that's not equatable, honestly.
Well, I don't think
Shit.
either is really excusable, but I only bring it up because again,
I'll still
like
be able to hear
I
you. I'm
don't.
gonna just cut my camera for a second.
Okay, I don't think that Trump is unique in that realm. And I think.
Well,
I mean,
neither do I. Like Bird, for instance, back when he was
yeah, I was about to.
he was like a KKK Grand Master and made it into Congress. And despite but like
And Hillary Clinton
I think we would
him,
respond. Right? Like if you're directly speaking to white supremacists, I think we would respond in kind to everybody. Like Trump did the thing that most politicians don't do, is he just spoke bluntly and didn't try to hide behind rhetoric and words. He just spoke right to them.
Well, so you mentioned the very fine people quote, and that's. I mean, have you ever seen the full quote?
I have seen it
context?
all, my dude. Yeah, like there's really no getting out of it. I know like people try to cherry pick that quote, but he's literally. I mean, have you seen the protesters he was talking about?
Well, the quote I'm not going to say it verbatim but he says that there were peaceful people protesting the statues and peaceful people who wanted the statues to remain. And he said that there were very fine people on both sides. And then directly after that, he says, not the white supremacists who I condemn totally.
I don't remember him saying that. I'd have to look at it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
Oh yeah, that's
I think
verbatim.
the first total condemnation that we got of white supremacy was far later in his presidency. But I could be wrong. But even if I am wrong, like I said, have you seen who was protesting? Because one side was literally all neo-Nazis. Like there was nobody peaceful. They didn't come there to be peaceful. They came there chanting blood and soil and Jews will not replace us. There was no very fine people on that side. None. That's the issue there.
Yeah, I mean, well, he called them out specifically in that interview, which yeah, you should go watch the whole thing because he did say verbatim that he is not talking about the white supremacists and he condemns them totally.
But again, the only people on that other side were the white supremacists. It was a white supremacist rally ran by white supremacists for white supremacists, not for anybody else. The people on the other side of that, it just wasn't Antifa, but anybody that was against white supremacy and fascism. Mainly Antifa. The only peaceful people would have been on that other side. The only people that weren't white supremacists would have been on the other side of that equation in that Charlottesville protest. This wasn't some Unite the Right protest where it was some conservatives, some white supremacists. This was literally a white supremacist rally.
I mean, the bulk of the Charlottesville march, probably, yeah.
Yeah, which is what this was referencing.
I mean, there were other people, but he does directly condemn the white supremacists in that quote.
Well, I mean,
which I think is
but
one of the
placates
problems
to them several times throughout his presidency. The Proud Boys are inherently male supremacist and white supremacist. Yes, they do accept they do have this new spokesperson that's Latino or whatever. Yeah, they're definitely not a group to be like a president of the United States. I mean, they say that Antifa is a terrorist organization. I would disagree with that. I think that sometimes they do terrorist tactics, but I definitely disagree that they're a terrorist organization. But like Proud Boys are definitely a hate group.
I don't know about that. So you and I are going to disagree on that. Proud Boys was essentially just started as a joke. And yeah, I think that's kind of one of the media hoaxes. And
have you ever seen the Proud Boys live in action?
Yeah, they get into clashes with Antifa a lot.
Oh yeah.
And
Like, have you heard the things that come out of their mouth as they're doing such?
uh, I mean, I've seen a couple videos.
I mean, let me tell you, every Proud Boy I've ever come in contact with is a racist piece of shit. Like every single one of them, every single one of
Yeah,
them,
I mean,
and they're not even the worst
I've
of the group. Like the Sovereign Citizens, the Boogaloo Boys, I would say it would be far worse. But again, when the president directly refers to the Proud Boys, the lesser of all of them, he's sending signals to all of them.
well, I mean, is that during the debate? Because he said he didn't know who they were. Who knows if that's true? Um,
I mean,
that was him.
he's the
That was him saying,
president.
"Sure."
He's the
He
president
said,
of the
"Name
United States. He
them."
knows who the Proud Boys is.
I don't. I honestly don't think he pays that much attention. But I mean, he was saying, "Name them. I'll condemn them if they're white supremacists." But see, this is why I get caught up in defending Trump, is because while I don't think he's a great guy or a great president, I think there are a lot of hoaxes surrounding it, and
There's
that
like
is
literally
political.
no hoax. Like he literally called the Proud Boys by name. He literally said the other side at Charlottesville was very fine people. And yes, he can go on later to say, yes, I condemn white supremacy, but I love you, Proud Boys. You know, like that doesn't work. Like you understand that, white supremacy in this nation is condemned, right? Like it's not a cool thing to just come out and be like, yo, I'm with the KKK. You're gonna be somewhat subvert even an idiot like Donald Trump. But the fact that he keeps mentioning it and he puts it in the way that he was putting it, definitely placate. I mean, there is a reason why he was most white supremacist guy. Now, some white supremacists didn't like him because of the whole Jewish son-in-law, his daughter converting to Judaism. They don't like Jews much. A lot of white supremacists considered Trump to be a pro-Israel guy, and he was. Let's be honest. But his placating to them, calling out the liberal left and the diversity that the liberal left stand for. It was clearly. I mean, you said you were leftist, former leftist. Like you can see the dog whistles just emanating, like we haven't seen from an American leader probably since the Dixiecrats, right?
I mean, I mostly disagree. I think that, like, for example, I've heard lots of racial slurs coming from Antifa, and for that counter example, and like I don't think Trump is.
Well, I mean,
I think he's happy to take their vote.
That wouldn't surprise me. I think that it's. I don't know. I think a lot of Antifa are honestly minorities. But a good chunk of them would be white. But it wouldn't surprise me because like Antifa doesn't stand for anti-racism; it's anti-fascist. So like you could have racists that are anti-fascist that would join Antifa. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And especially like if you have people looking for the worst of the worst, they're gonna find those clips of this Antifa member being racist as hell. But I think predominantly, most Antifa are on the left and wouldn't be racist by nature.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's mostly shouting racial slurs at police who are minorities. So
they don't like police, but I don't even condone that. Like I don't justify Antifa's bad actions by any means.
Yeah, I think whenever you have a large group of people, you can find members doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But I just see, I think it's like what I just said. Like there's going to be people on every side voting for whoever. Like Richard Spencer, the leading open white supremacist, he did support Trump at first, and then he supported Biden.
I think he supported Biden to turn people against Biden, to try to see if or to prove like media bias, right? Because the media definitely picked up on Spencer supporting Trump. Will they pick up on Spencer supporting Biden? But the thing about Richard Spencer, and I think that I wish more white supremacists would understand, because I think essentially most white supremacists are, I could be assuming a lot here, but I have been in contact with quite a few, and I've actually grown up with quite a few. They're poor white dudes, right? And Richard Spencer is a very privileged from old money, like never, born with a silver spoon in his mouth type guy. And I just wish more white supremacists would understand that about him, because he's used the meme game to kind of change the dynamics of America subvertly.
Yeah, I mean, my theory about that is because what I understand from Nazis and neo-Nazis is that they want a lot of socialist policies. And Richard Spencer said the Trump moment served us so far, but now it's time to get with Biden because he's going to give us the
What do you mean
policies
by
that we
like
want.
white supremacists want, or I should say ethno nationalists want
Yeah.
socialist policy?
Well, I mean, if you read the 25-point plan, and it's exactly the same as what was on, I think they took it down, the Stormfront website, is essentially like 20 to 25, most of them, if not all, are socialist policies like uh, nationalized health care, obviously only for their national race, but socialized healthcare. They had a bunch of laws or goals set in there about ending rent seeking and predatory bank behaviors, which, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm sure the way that the Nazis wanted to do it was probably a bad way. Um, yeah,
So when you say socialist, because like the Nazis weren't really socialist. I mean, they were nationalists. I think the party started out as a socialist movement, but the fascists killed off all those socialists in the Nazi movement. I'm trying to understand. It has been quite a while since I've actually dealt with a white supremacist face to face. Like probably since I actually lived in North Carolina. I can't remember of any like protest here that I went to, or if there have even been any here since I moved here. But I used to be like deeply involved way back in the day when I lived in North Carolina and I first came out of my racism. And I've seen the KKK rallies. I've actually seen white supremacist rallies. And I don't like when you say socialist, do you mean like some of the socialist regimes that were very authoritarian in nature, or socialism as a philosophy?
well, it's, I guess, a little bit of both because the Nazi Party is National Socialism,
Yeah, but
National
I mean they're
Socialist
not
Party.
really socialist; they're fascist. And socialism
Well,
and fascism are not the same thing.
I mean, the as I understand it, fascism is nationalist socialism, and National Socialism is actually just racist socialism. Um, and and by socialism, I mean authoritarian, totalitarian government control of economics.
And that's not what I mean. That's not what socialism means, though. Socialism is what, just who owns the means of production.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm an anti-socialist now, because I don't think that you can stop capitalism without authoritarian and totalitarian control of the economy, state control of the economy. Otherwise, people are going to be able to privately own things and be able to take private profit.
I would, like I said, I'm not a huge into my socialism to really defend it. So I would leave that for like a true socialist to defend that against. But like, I forgot my point. I totally forgot the point that I was going to just make. I had a really good point to rebut, and it just completely slipped my head. I apologize for that.
Um, yeah, I was just talking about like what I define socialism as.
Oh yeah.
And then,
So yeah, you're saying more of an authoritative. So you've got, it's almost like you still have these Red Scare connotations of what socialism is. Socialism doesn't have to be that authoritative thing, and I think often people try to conflate, because the Nazis did at first call themselves the Nationalist Socialist Party, that they are indeed socialists. But I think most socialists would tell you that they're not. And Puff is pointing out in the side chat, and I was going to point it out myself. Hitler and the Nazi Party were openly hostile to communists from the start. They hated communism.
Yeah,
oftentimes,
the
if we talk about socialism, we're talking about far left politics. If we're talking about the Nazis and fascism, that's far right politics.
so if we want to get a little deeper into the World War II stuff, so yeah, I see it now as basically socialist civil war, and the Marxists or the Marxist socialists or the communists were basically have demonized Nazism and Italian fascism precisely because it is so close to Marxist socialism. So the Marxist socialism is about uh, class warfare. The Nazi socialism is about the race, and the Italian socialism was about the nation. But they all shared uh, the philosophy of uh, total state economic control and socialized welfare and basically anti-capitalism. And Hitler specifically bought into this conspiracy theory that the Jews controlled both capitalism and Marxism. So he thought this conspiracy theory that Hitler believed was that the Jews controlled the banks and capitalism, so that this would drive countries to collapse because he thought capitalism doesn't work, and that this would lead to a people's revolution, which would lead to Marxism. And he also believed that the Jews controlled the Marxist movement, so that they controlled the banks and capitalism right now, but they wanted people to revolt and turn to Marxism, which they also controlled, so that then they would control everything. And that's what Hitler believed. It's not true. And the economics behind he thought it was the shrinking market problem, where he thought poor countries industrializing would lead to less food production for the rich countries, and which would essentially just collapse the rich countries. And so that was his whole crazy conspiracy theory. And so they believed that the capitalists and the Marxists were controlled by Jews and were evil. And they thought that they had the fascist third way, which was, I wouldn't call it centrist, but because it was actually very extremist and totalitarian. But they thought it was somewhere between communism and capitalism, which is the long story short, I guess.
All right, yeah. So you understand? So most American socialists, and I'd say most socialists in Western civilization, um, well, I'd say most American socialists. All right, so we're not advocating for like a socialist country here in America. We are advocating for a more hybrid system than what we have, and we are advocating for a way to rid ourselves of crony capitalism. I think most socialists in this country, you're going to have your extreme wing nuts, of course. But most socialists of this country realize that in order to ever become a true socialist state, you're talking not in our lifetimes. I think we just want to see a bit more, like you say, total state control of the means of production. And I don't really see socialism like that. I see socialism as like the people taking control of the means of production, the workers having control of the means of production, not the state. And it depends on what real model of socialism that you subscribe to. But I think that the only model that we really have is the capitalist model that we've all been raised under. Now, within that capitalist model, you have already hybrid elements of socialism implied into that, but primarily you have a capitalist market that has been corrupted by oligarchy and power and greed. I think that capitalism has worked against the poor, always has, always will. I think capitalism works against the working class, always has and always will. And I think when I speak of socialism, I'm speaking of unionizing, I'm speaking of worker power, I'm speaking of workers taking control from the bourgeois class, the owner class.
Yeah, and I mean that was a lot of the Nazi rhetoric, was against the bankers and how companies would exploit people. And I'm also against crony capitalism, which is I think it's a decent word, but kind of a misnomer, because that is essentially state control of the economy. So the reason crony capitalism works the way it does is because corporations can buy off the people who control the economy, which is the state. And so I agree with you that the intent behind socialism is to put economic control in the hands of the workers. But if you look at how it actually works and has to work, like for example, Stalinism, or like Tankyism, I guess, it's openly like, yeah, we have to the state is the party that represents the people, and the state has to take control of the economy, and thus it will be in the hands of the people because the state represents the people. And I definitely recognize that most socialists today, I don't know about most, but probably most that I've talked to, they reject that and they say, no, we're against the state. That's statism. That's state capitalism or whatever. And again, I think that's an okay label that gets to the heart of things, but again, a misnomer, because it's the state owning things for private profit, but it's privately profiting state actors. So it's more like socialism for the elites.
What I would really
because they're collectivizing the property of the people and giving it to themselves.
What I would really like, because I am not really the person to really try to convince you of socialism or American socialism. I do have somebody in my side chat, and maybe even a Leo Filius. I don't know if you've heard of Leo.
Oh yeah, we've had this discussion.
Have you? I'd like to see that. I'd like to. Yeah. I'd like to, have this conversation with you again, but like maybe with people that could truly represent the socialist arguments. Because as I said, like this is, my socialism is something very, very new. It actually happened live on a stream back when my co-host Ali was still here. She brought Pick Puncher on. I'm sure you know who Pick Puncher is. He goes by a different name now. I can't remember his new name. Puff, if you know Pick Puncher's new name, put it in the side chat. But he's a big, a somewhat bigger bread tuber socialist type guy. And they got me to convert to socialism, but I'm still honestly, like, I'm not quite sure what that means, right? Like, I said, I see socialism as the politic for the people. I'm reading I'm not reading it yet, but I'm going to be reading the Communist Manifesto for the first time since I was in college. So I'm really going to be defining but I do know a few socialists that I think that could argue, because like a lot of the things that I'm hearing, and I'm not saying because I think you're a smart dude, and man, my dogs are going, or not, my brother's dogs are going insane, but I hear a lot of stuff that I would associate with the Red Scare. And I'm not sure how much of that would infect somebody that is clearly an intelligent person like yourself. I would like to have the conversation, and it could be on your channel or on this one, but like allow at least like a socialist, Xander is his name, a socialist to kind of maybe come and be able to kind of talk to you about some of the points that you're making, because I'm just not that guy.
Yeah, no, and I'm not trying to put you in a corner.
Oh no, yeah, and you're not at all, because I do label myself as a socialist, so I pretty much put myself in that corner when I brought it up, right? So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I used to be a socialist, and I still have like the memorabilia and stuff, which is just, I like it now because of the historical value. But I used to just be like, yeah, straight up, like, yeah, I support Soviet and stuff. Then I took Russian history, and that started to change my mind a little bit. I was more than a socialist or communist, I was just an anti-capitalist. But the more that I kind of looked into it, the more I started seeing, well, the problems of capitalism are not problems with private property and profit motive. It's the fact that the state has control over the economy and that state can be bought, obviously, by corporations and businesses, which are seen as capitalist. So it's kind of a sleight of hand.
So, like, not saying that socialism is the ultimate solution, but do you think that that can be solved without some kind of socialist movement in this country? Like that ability for the owner class, the donor class, to buy states, to buy politicians. Like, won't that take some kind of people movement, which are usually associated with socialism movements, right? Won't it take
Mhm.
some kind of movement to really overcome that? As you said, like, neither one of us are surprised, or neither one of us think that the Democrats are crying about the provision in the HR1 bill about Citizens United, right? Like, they're
Yeah.
probably a bit relieved that part didn't get passed.
Yeah. And when right wingers or even Richard Spencer say Biden's a socialist, I'm like, no, he's not.
Yeah, he's
He's the,
definitely a capitalist
at
without a
least
doubt.
not, at least not in the that colloquial sense. I think in the sense that he wants state control of the economy, and he wants to socialize profits for the elites. Sure. And so, like, state capitalism or crony capitalism, uh, which I think is fundamentally socialist, and this is why, is because it is privatization of profit, which people associate with capitalism, except in the back door they socialize the losses. So all the taxpayers have to pay for bailouts and things like that.
Well, yeah,
And,
and like, the rich don't even have to pay their damn taxes, right? Like,
well, yeah, and
I
corporations
think,
get tax breaks and
what's
and
Jeff
the
Bezos? What's
limited liability.
Bezos's personal income? Like, what's the salary he makes? It's either like 80 grand a year or 800 grand a year, but either one of those
Yeah,
numbers come close to like what the dude actually is bringing in. you know,
yeah, or just the wealth that he's able to move at any given
yeah,
time.
and
Um,
he's considered. I think the issue in this country, a big problem in this country, is that Bezos is considered a quote unquote lefty, right? Like, he contributes to the Democratic Party and he's known for
yeah,
that. And it's like, I don't want your money. I don't want you to have your money. You know.
yeah, and neither party really wants true libertarian principles, which is kind of what clues me in a little bit.
Well,
But
not to say that
like
I
what
don't
you're
want them to
saying,
make better money. Like, so Amazon's yours. You should make the most money in that company, just not at the
mhm,
expense of your employees' poverty.
yeah, and while I'm pretty much against taxes as a libertarian, the fact that Amazon gets tax breaks, but all the mom and pop shops still have to pay they don't get tax breaks. And while they don't have to pay as much total, it's the percentage to their income is a lot greater. And I think it's really basically a conspiracy against small business and for corporations which are in bed with the state. And that's where the whole relationship breaks down.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and I
like,
will say this, like, I think that if we don't find, if the two opposing sides in this country don't, the two opposing worker factions of this country don't come together and figure it out, if we can't come together and figure out how to do it politically and how to take some of our power back, what you're gonna see, and I think history is gonna show this, is that really bloody movement, um, that oftentimes would give what I can say, would oftentimes be labeled as a bad connotation to socialist movements. Like, if you're thinking about the French Revolution and just the brutality there, right?
mm,
Um, that's often a backlash from the suppression of your people, and I think that the longer we allow these corporations and these rich people to get away with this, um, the more bloody that retaliation is going to be in the end.
mhm.
If I could express that clearly, like, I think we can
Yeah,
avoid that.
I agree.
I think we can avoid that if we can somehow find a way to get over these wedge issues and come together and just demand change, right?
Yeah.
But the hard part is getting over those wedge issues. I just had a stream, kind of pointing out how right now the Republicans are trying to create a wedge issue with critical race theory, and critical race theory is a theory taught in law school, not K through 12, right? Like, you know, it's a misnomer, and it's a controversy out of nothing, but it has a name that they know is going to create a buzz. It's kind of like how young Earth creationists will latch on to the name of Dawkins' book. The entire name, right? and try to turn him into something that he's not. It's kind of along those same lines.
Well, I mean, before I want to,
she's gone. But I turned my camera off because you're probably not familiar. I have a lot of theists that will take advantage of any time that my daughter is in the room with me. So I turn my camera off when she comes in.
Yeah, that's. They're nasty. I mean,
they get real nasty.
A lot of Jesus followers are not so Christ-like. But I did want to mention one more thing about, socializing losses in the corporations is where. So it goes back to Citizens United a little bit, is where a corporation is considered has the rights of a person, and what that essentially does is it says whoever's in charge of the corporation is a separate entity, so they don't have to take responsibility for what the company does. So if the corporation has been found guilty of something, well, the board can just wipe their hands of it, and the corporation owes the money.
Yep.
They can and they don't owe the money, even though they were making the decisions for the corporation. And so that's, to me, that's fundamentally not capitalist, because that's not obeying the rules of private property. It's kind of perverting it. And so, I mean, yeah, I would really love to have that conversation with maybe you hosting with some other
I would
people.
play moderator, definitely, and I would probably learn as you guys converse. And that's the thing. I'm really glad that we had this conversation, Snake, because I did have some misconceptions. I saw what I saw, and I'm like, that's a damn Trumper. Screw that guy. And I don't care if I like what he says about theists, but no, there's always nuance to it, and you're definitely more complex than I would have. Initially would have ever given you credit for, and I should have, because you're a smart guy.
Well, thank you, and I'll admit I do, in comments and chats, I will say provocative things to get attention,
too,
and it worked. Look at that.
Yeah, I do too. I can't knock you there.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely I think, and I want us to stay in touch through the emails, and I'll set up that conversation. And it doesn't always have to be on my channel. Like, if you want to have a conversation on your channel, I'll come and have a conversation. I know Puff would probably love to have a conversation with you. He's a guy that I think probably knows a lot more about the socialist arguments than I do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then to get back a little bit to
please continue.
You were saying, like with the wedge issues, I definitely think that, and this is where we're really going to agree, that the Republicans and the right wing and conservatives, they're all, I think the religious movement is just pure poison for them. Because of things like, and they take advantage of these wedge issues like abortion and gender, sexuality issues. It really just, religion is to blame for all of that. There's no way that they would care at all if it weren't for the religion. But it's almost not even inherently part of it. Like that, it is in the Bible, but it kind of just depends on the preacher. Like if the preacher is progressive, his flock is progressive. But if the religious preacher wants to bring in politics, they do it all the time. Like, you're not really supposed to tell people who to vote for, but they do it. Like, you're not a Christian if you're a Democrat, is often preached in some of the like extremist areas.
Yeah,
and so that's one reason. Like, I'll sometimes be arguing with leftists or talking to conservatives, and I'll be like, this is why I can never be a conservative, is because of all the religious issues. And it's like, no matter what side I'm on, it's like if I'm talking to atheists, I'll often butt with them around like the economics or socialist issues. But if I'm talking to capitalists and stuff, it's like a lot of them are very religious Christians, and sometimes I'm like, am I crazy? Because a lot of the people that I agree with are very fundamentalist Christians. But I think it's more like they're just being led in these directions because the dual party system is all about divide and conquer. But yeah, sometimes I feel crazy because it's like no matter what side I'm on, it's always like, well, I can't join you guys because you're all religious and
I get it. Like I consider myself a far leftist. I consider myself somewhat a social justice warrior, whatever that means. But at the same time, social justice warriors come at me all the time. I get canceled by far leftists all the time because
you're never far enough left.
You're never far enough left. So I totally understand that. I get attacked by the right for a bunch of crazy stuff that's not true. I get attacked by the right for some stuff that is true. But yeah, it's like it seems like when you refuse to play those team sports, then you're gonna get attacked by either side. It's they're gonna pick up on that. Oh, you're fair, so we don't like you. You don't play partisan. We don't like you. And I think people that don't play partisan, those are the voices that count the most. I think most socialists, at least the ones that I know, have become very nonpartisan, at least in party affiliation, but become somewhat hyper-partisan when it comes to whatever segment of socialism they belong to, whether it be the anarcho-socialist or whatever it is. There's a whole bunch of them out there now.
I think most people want to be nonpartisan.
I was actually thinking
have a mix,
anarcho-socialist, anarcho-communist. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think most people are kind of in the middle, or at least have kind of a mixed view. But the polarizing nature of a lot of these discussions, it's like you're either with us or against us, and that forces people to kind of shut up and kind of keep their heads down, or just again the two-party system. It's like, well, you got two choices, like evil or slightly less evil. So
yeah, I can think of like the gun issue. I'm staunchly anti-gun. I'm very anti-gun. It's one of my most passionate issues that I'm passionate about. But at the same time that I'm very anti-gun, I wish for this ideal world where no guns exist. I'm also a realist. So if I'm afraid, as I am, my daughter goes to elementary school every day. She's in middle school now. She'll be going. The next step would be high school. I fear for school shootings. I fear that her school will be one of those, and that she will be one of those statistics. And if I hear legislation, hey, let's train teachers, or I hear people offering ideas like let's train teachers, or they'll lock up their firearms, but in this particular situation, they'll be able to use a firearm. And yes, I understand that in those situations they might accidentally hit a kid too, but if they can stop a shooter situation from progressing to the point, I think we should at least debate it and argue it and not just automatically dismiss it just because I'm anti-gun. Yeah. I want solutions to the problems that, hey, I'm afraid to send my daughter to school, and I'm open to any solution when it comes to that.
Yeah, I don't hear any debate on that, and it's I'm happy to hear you say that because I don't know how I feel about arming teachers either. It's like we either hear, well, you're either a Democrat and totally against it, or a Republican and for it. I don't know how that would work. Would it just unlock as soon as the school goes on lockdown or something like that? But yeah, I want to hear.
Yeah,
I want to hear the debate, the pros and
arguments
cons,
and the debates. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we never get there. It's like, oh no, that's terrible, or oh no, that's a great idea. Like let's just debate it.
Yeah, like I don't want to put that on teachers and say, okay, well now you're like a SWAT officer or whatever. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, well, it might save some lives. And have there been any teachers that came to school and started a school shooting? Or all the ones I've heard of, it was students.
Yes, usually students. Yeah, we on the left like to say right wing gun nuts, but yeah, like it's usually a student, or somebody that I can remember one instance. I think it was Sandy Hook, where the shooter was mad at his parents, and his dad happened to be the principal of the school. He killed his mom before he went to the school and killed a bunch of kids. But yeah, like and I'm not sure if that's the solution, but I just know that I want solutions, and I would prefer that comes through gun control and stringent, background checks and psychoanalysis. But at the same time, if we can create a Band-Aid solution until we get there, that just might provide a layer of protection for the innocent children or anybody that's going to be a part of these school shootings. I want to at least hear it and tell me why I shouldn't be for it. Not tell me, you're left and you shouldn't be for it. No, tell me why this is a bad idea. And yeah, like I've heard some of them. Like I said, I think all indications show, unless you have like extensive training, the possibility of you shooting an innocent bystander is phenomenal. And nobody, unless you have like that in situational training to where how you're going to react in those situations. But I think that's what's being called for, right? Like you wouldn't just be able to be one of these teachers to grab one of these guns unless you went through extensive training, probably an entire summer, if not even longer than that.
Yeah, and I am pro Second Amendment, but it's odd to me that you have to go through more training to get a driver's license than you do to get a gun, which, I mean, you have maybe like a 10 or 15 minute, like, don't point a gun at people before you go to a shooting range or something like that. And that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very basic. And I think some states make it harder than other states. It's usually on a state-by-state basis, but definitely too easy in this country. But yeah, that's like, I can get past my pipe dreams and my ideals and just want, relative, practical solutions. And I don't care if it comes from the right or the left. I just want my kids safe. Like I want to feel somewhat more comfortable every day sending her to school, especially the older she gets. The older she gets, the probabilities increase because it tends to be junior highs, high schools, colleges that these things happen at. Very rarely in elementary school,
Unfortunately, Sandy Hook was one of those. Yeah. And it's kind of like any prohibition where if you ban something, it's still going to be available illegally. I mean,
well, yeah, and I totally
Chicago
agree with that.
is one of the deadliest gun places in the world, and you can't have a gun in the city.
And there is dynamics to that though, because they're surrounded by states that is a lot easier. And one of the states, Indiana or Illinois, I think Chicago's in Illinois, so it would be Indiana is like one of the easiest states. And then you have a lot of people, people often talk about the vans that they see around Chicago, and usually these when they're referencing these are vans from out of state bringing in guns and weaponry. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that right wing actually ships a lot of the weapons to Chicago. So some of the violence that is, I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories. My daughter's knocking. 1 second. What's up, sweetie?
I feel low.
Well, check your blood.
Okay.
Let me know. Yeah, like, there's a bunch of nuance to it. I think that, some indications show that if you ban guns, very good things can happen. Australia would be one of the things that come to mind. They did a huge gun buyback. I think they've recently had their first mass shooting in quite some time. If you look at Japan, it's really hard to get guns in Japan, and they never have mass shootings. like never, so I think that there's definitely a correlation between mass shootings and the amount and how easy it is to get guns in this country. And I think that by far per capita, we have the most guns than most places in the civilized world anyway, if not even the third world countries. So I think that it's a huge issue. I'm totally anti-gun. It's personal reasons. I won't get into them. I've gotten into them on the channel. But I'm also, like I said, a realist. I don't think that in my lifetime anyway, America's ever going to be gun-free. We do have the Second Amendment. However you interpret it, because there's argument over that. But if you're going to live in reality, then you need real solutions. And getting rid of all guns in America isn't a real solution right now.
I think there are reasonable compromises that most people would be happy with.
Me too.
And that we're just played against each other. They take the most extreme positions and make people angry at each other.
Yeah,
that's the game.
They portray people like me as, we want to get rid of all guns, and sure we do, but at the same time, most of us are realists, and we live in the real world, and we understand that that's not going to happen.
Yeah, but if you take the most extreme position on each side and you just present that, then no progress occurs on either side.
Turn this other mute button off. My daughter felt a bit low, so we checked her blood. So sorry about that. But yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's indicative of the political structure that we live in. I think it's very partisan. The divide is real. I called for I called that there would be a civil war in this country in my lifetime, and I still think we're right there. But I think that we can avoid it because, like I said, a lot of bad things happened with Donald Trump, but I think one of the good things is it did get a lot of people that weren't interested in politics somewhat more interested in politics. And I think that once that happens, then the conversations can begin. Like I'm not... Personally, I wouldn't give up on any of the people that were at the January 6th insurrection or any of the people that subscribe to Q, because, while they're subscribing to conspiracy theories, they are becoming involved in politics. And once they start becoming involved in politics, then they can start talking like that and hopefully come to a better position than what they start with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just think that the libertarian philosophy is really the only one that kind of explains what's going on with the two-party system. Like if you just take the view of Democrats, it's just, Republicans are evil and they ruin everything. And if you're a Republican, you just think Democrats are evil and they ruin everything. And then there's reality where it's like, well, they're colluding with each other to kind of just keep themselves as the only two in power, and to be at war all the time, in order to funnel money back into the corporations, which again privately pocket the money, but then they charge us the bill to make all the weapons, and then they sell it using our money to buy it. So it's a messed up system.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that, and the left often we're labeled as the anti-gun party, but let me tell you, a lot of people on the left aren't. They just placate and they just talk that talk, and then once they talk to somebody like me that's really anti-gun, oh man, they don't like me. You're absolutely insane, and I'm like, yes, but let's have this insane conversation. Why do we have to live in a world full of guns? And let's talk about the Second Amendment. Let's talk about what it really says. Let's talk about that Supreme Court decision that interpreted it as an individual right, especially in the face of the lack of knowledge that our forefathers had when they made this law. We're talking about people that had muskets, not semi-automatic machine guns, it's just it seems like the conversation could be a bit more real, and I'm of the position, the libertarian position is I believe they kind of try to stick to the Constitution. My personal position is any antiquated document needs to be re-looked at, reevaluated. Like nothing should be set in stone. The way this country was at its inception, it just isn't like that today. And
Well, I
sometimes
mean,
some of these constitutional issues, I think, should be easier to change. Like Citizens United, that's going to be a bitch to change because it's a constitutional issue now.
yeah. Well, the Constitution was meant to be amended, so
It just we made it
while
really hard to do it.
yeah, and while I think most of the amendments and the rights are good ideas, you can't just take it as set in stone. Um, it does have to be reexamined. Um, and I think the conversation should always be had. I don't think that there's any context in which something like the First Amendment should or could ever be overturned. I think free speech is like the absolute most important right. But you know what? It would be hypocritical to stop someone from speaking out against it because you have the right to have that opinion. That is one problem I do have with the left is the conservatives used to be more anti-First Amendment. They wanted to censor speech, and now I'm seeing its head rearing more on the left, where they want to control speech now, and it seems like the left is becoming more Puritan as they're gaining the cultural hegemony.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I grew up, it was CD burnings by the right, Eminem CD burnings, and now it's the left trying to cancel Eminem. It's like, the left, we were defending this guy for being able to say what he wanted to say back then, even if we didn't agree with some of those words. Now it's like the left, no, let's go hang Eminem. And then it's like even in the context of what he's saying and what he grew up in, like all of this is important. And yet getting so sensitive about speech, I've fallen victim to it too. I get outraged sometimes. And I do kind of, struggle with the complexities, especially once you see what false information can do. It is a struggle and a nuance, and I try to keep my side on the side of free speech because ultimately I think that is my one problem with what I see from the left, which is the left eating its own. You don't really see that from the right. The right usually stands unified. You see it a bit now in the Trump era. Trump, like I said, Trump's kind of like taking over the Republican Party, and if you oppose Trump, then you get canceled. But usually they tend to unify around their particular wedge issues, and especially the Supreme Court. They've always been kind of smarter than the left in that regard. I call them the vocal minority, and it's because they are able to stand unified, usually with each other.
Yeah. The problem with the conservatives, and I mean, somewhat thankfully, is that they're almost purely just reactionary. They don't really stand for anything on their own. They're just always trying to stop the Democrats from doing whatever they're doing, and I think that's somewhat thankful because a lot of their opinions are pretty problematic. But if they actually had real principles instead of just trying to conserve whatever was in the past just by virtue of because they're just conserving it, then they might have better principles. Like kind of what you were saying, like there is a huge problem with false information, and I mean, if there was a button to stop it, I would stop it.
But it's hard to do that and not infringe on free speech, right?
Yeah, it's the problem is like it's not so much like I was saying. It's not so much that we want to privatize police. It's just that the system as it is corrupt, and so it's like I don't want false information and like religious people out there spouting nonsense and conspiracy theories, but the alternative is authoritarian.
Yeah,
the alternative is giving the power to some legislative body or authoritarian body to tell you what you can and can't say. And maybe day one it starts out all against bad information, but pretty soon it's either going to be turned over to someone who with malicious intent, or they're going to make a huge mistake. And
Yeah, and
so it's just too much of a risk.
I think that's why I take the stance that I do and the approach that I do is because a lot of people, especially in the atheist community, are like, it's almost like we're to this point, or they're to this point anyway. Ignore fundamentalism. That's the way to do it. And in my opinion, once you think that not confronting the issues or not having the conversation is the solution, then that does lead to that silencing. You're going to use authoritative powers to try to get rid of that speech that you find harmful. The only way to keep free speech alive, in my opinion, is to utilize free speech against those bad ideas and that false information, is to stand up loudly and proudly and try to defy it, as we do against religion. Similarly towards bad political views, and I think that's, you have to look at the worst of the worst and combat those ideas to really one, address them, but two, put them back in the shadows where they belong. To where if you're going to say don't talk to this person because they're so bad, and cancel this person because they're so bad, you're ultimately are infringing upon their free speech when truth should be able to overcome the lies, right? You just got to speak that truth as loud as they're speaking the lies.
Yeah, and if you push them underground and if you don't have that debate, then you become weak. You don't know what they're talking about anymore. And
they're willing to spread at like random, like just they have free reign then to operate and do whatever they want.
There's no pushback that's seen, and so whoever hears it is not going to be equipped to defend it. And that's one reason, like, creationism is a joke, but I think it is serious work that people are doing to combat creationism. And the reason why it's staying relatively low is because people do combat it, and it does get more sophisticated. They're getting better arguments. They're still not very good, but at least rhetorically better.
They do seem to evolve a bit. I love using that word. They seem to evolve a bit in their argumentation once they've been defeated.
They've come a long way.
And I agree with that. I think that's a perfect example. Yeah, it's silly, but it is, we kind of left that to kind of roost there for a while, and people weren't confronting it. And then you see more and more people are slowly becoming YEC again. And you're like, well, how is this even taking hold? Especially like once you notice, like, this really wasn't a thing until the late 60s, early 70s, I believe, when this became a thing here in America.
Yeah, like your average person is not going to be able to debate your creationist apologist on this. They're just going to lose. But at least your average,
they're spending a lot of time, invested time in developing these arguments, going through the science to look at how they can attack that science.
Yeah, and at least your average person will maybe have heard someone who's good at debating them, and so they'll be like, I don't know what I'm talking about, but at least I've heard someone who does know what they're talking about, and they've refuted what you're saying. So yeah, I definitely think that's important. And
I think you
like
do
I said,
a pretty good
unless,
job on that. I think that's what
thanks.
surprised me the most, is because you can be very science minded, and you can really take some of these YACs to task. I've been impressed with some of the debates that I've seen.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I actually liked you debated Matt Powell, right?
Yeah. The notorious modern day debacle, as I call it.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a mess. Like, I don't know if I never lose my cool, but with him, like, I might lose my cool.
I did a couple times. The modern day debate, because most people have seen that one, big platform. They haven't seen our other conversations. He used the classic bait and switch on that debate, and totally played it perfectly. I didn't see it coming, and oh man, he played that, and I fell right into it. And that's the one debate. No, that's one of two debates that I admit I clearly lost, even though I got some good wins in that one. Like when I got him to really show his homosexuality on modern day debate, he hasn't been allowed back to modern day debate. It's to show his homophobia, not his homosexuality. He hasn't been allowed back.
Same
to
thing,
modern
really.
day. Yeah. I think there's some closeted shit going on there, but he hasn't been allowed back. He made some bad comments, but that's one that I just. He played it well. He did that bait and switch that I had never experienced before, and didn't think I'd get played so easily upon me, but he was able to do it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they are masters of manipulation and rhetoric.
Yep.
And it's almost, you do need the facts to back you up, but there's another level on which the debate is happening that they're really good at. Admittedly, which it's just all rhetoric, and they know how to kind of like try and paint people into a corner where you don't see it coming.
Oh yeah.
And then and always debunking a lie takes 10 times longer than it takes to say a lie.
Yeah, and he's so good at just spitting out those lies. He no shame at all. And like in our first two conversations, and I'm by no means a science-minded guy. When I first started talking to Matt Powell, I didn't even realize, he was YEC. I knew about the homophobia, and I knew about the video game comments, because everybody knew about the video game comments back then. Everybody was talking about it because they were just so stupid. Atheist in video games. Oh, it's still funny to even think about it. But so I didn't even really realize that I was walking into an evolution debate. Had never done an evolution conversation. I'm not a science guy. I'm not. I'm more of your theology type guy. I'm going to sit there and argue that Old Testament with you. I'm going to sit there and argue with you about Paul and the apostles and what Jesus said. What Jesus meant, what the Old Testament meant. Are we going to have a literal interpretation, or are we going to have a more progressive interpretation? Hell, I can sit here and interpret this to be a UFO invasion. But, when it comes to the science and being able to combat, there are definite people for that. And you have good knowledge. Gutsick Gibbons, Arn Ra, he's made that his thing. I had no idea what I was getting into. So he's hitting me with, DNA of Tyrannosaurus Rex. And my only response can be really like, I'm pretty sure you're bullshitting me right now.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how, but I know you are.
Yeah, well, it's almost like it's almost not about the details. Like, that's always good to have, but it's more epistemology. Like, how would you know this, and why are the scientists saying otherwise? And they can sit there and spin all these conspiracy theories about how this, and cherry pick quotes from scientists, but it's like, yeah, but like all the experts disagree with you, right?
Yeah.
So
and
it's
that's what
like,
I'm working on now is epistemology. I'm devoting a lot of time to learning philosophy and why do people think the way they think? Why do I think the way that I think? Something I've never really done before, and I'm really doing that now. And I think that you're right, and I think that that's the main issues where Matt Powell in our conversations was really able to get one up on me, is he had a fundamental understanding of his epistemology and how to use that against me, to where I'm just in there like, how can you hate gay people like you do? And I've learned so much since that moment. Like, he was literally one of the first theists I ever talked to. But it does seem like they, like what he was at, he was actively looking for somebody like me, as opposed to somebody like you, right? Like, appeal to my rage and appeal to how I'm going to respond to certain things he's saying in regards to homosexuals, so he can get me into an evolution debate, so he doesn't have to debate Arn Ra or you or Gutsick Gibbons. Never once have seen him actually debate anybody that can, thoroughly combat the things that he says.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing they do, is like, you'll go, okay, well, my expertise is in like whatever cell biology, and they'll be like, okay, let's talk about geology then.
Yeah.
Or let's talk about cosmology. Just to get you out of your element.
And then me to catch up, I got to study it all.
Yeah. I just will be like, I know nothing about cosmology. I'm not even going to discuss it. But it's like with abiogenesis, it's not even like I've started to realize it doesn't matter how much you talk about all the little details of like, okay, does this reaction work? Does this reaction work? It's like, because fundamentally they're still working off of a God of the gaps argument.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, so how would you know if you're right or not if you're just, if every argument comes down to a fallacy? And so that's the important hurdle that you have to get over, because it doesn't matter if I showed them all these reactions, they're still going to be like, yeah, but you don't know this, so therefore God.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely
That's where
agree.
the focus needs to actually be.
And that's why, like, I am thankful to the atheists that can really combat that, because that's not my thing. And that's usually one area where they, like, standing for truth. I talked to that guy before I ever knew who he was, and boy, was that a mistake. Let me tell you, because he's coming with all this crap, and I'm like, can you please just speak English? I don't talk like this. What are you even saying? And
he doesn't either.
Yeah, he does. I have learned that since.
Jargon.
Yeah, I've learned that since. But yeah, he's hitting me with all this stuff, and all that did was just make me mad, and essentially make me look like a fool in the face of what he was hitting me with, right? Like, and they do these things on purpose. And I have no doubts that he anyway would, and I'm sure you guys have talked probably several times. He's not going to run away from somebody like you or Gutsick Gibbons. That's not in his forte. But Matt Powell and that ilk, they definitely will every single time. I am actually interested in my one of my biggest enemies outside of Matt is Smokey Saint. But I'm interested in seeing the debate that he had with him recently, because I've actually heard good things that Smokey did in that debate.
He with SFT and Smokey?
Yeah, I think it was on SFT's channel, yeah.
Yeah, Smokey's not quite young earth creationist, and he calls out the other Christians a lot on stuff, which I just think is hilarious when Christians fight, because it's like you supposedly have the absolute truth, but none of you can agree on what it is. So how can you blame us for being like, it's not clear enough where your God is, because even you guys can't agree on what it is.
Yeah, and he's like the best example of that right now. It seems like he's really kind of tearing shit apart in the Christian community.
Yeah. Well, he and I had like a 5-hour debate on the flood once. That was a
I bet that was
journey.
Yeah. I had one of the first real side chats that I went to on his channel. We were talking about the age of Adam and stuff, and his justification got Adam down to like 250 years old or something like that. But I'm still like, you don't really think a human being lived to 250 years old, do you? Like, that's just kind of the thing. And that's like, for a long time, I thought he was a young earth creationist, just with kind of like different views. And then I found out he's like older. I don't even really think I know exactly what he is. He's definitely not YEC.
He's kind of undecided. Like, he's still like surveying the arguments there.
Yeah.
But I guess that's better.
He's definitely a show within a show within a show when it comes to Smokey. But yeah, no, I really, we're over 2 hours. I really appreciate the fact that you came on, you defended your positions. Politically, I don't agree with all of them, but at the same time, I have a better understanding, and really glad to hear you're just not an all-out Trumper, because like that's kind of the image that I've had. When you do come up in conversation, I have brought that up, and I'm like, yeah, he's a Trumper, and people are like, no way he's a Trumper. But I think that your explanations here definitely bring nuance to that, and have given me some clarity, and I think that I'm not going to hold that against you. We can argue capitalism when I'm more familiar with how I want to argue against it, and I definitely want to hear and set up something with you and Puff, or have a more, where I'll play moderator and kind of hear your thoughts of capitalism versus socialism. But I'm really glad that we did this because I don't want to have the wrong perception of you. Because I do think that we're allies, especially against theism, and we should be able to overcome political differences, I think, and try to have an understanding of where the other person's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for giving me the chance to come and clarify and stuff, and
Yeah, it's
and
been
I
actually
enjoy
too
these
long.
discussions.
Considering we have been kind of in the same debatosphere. I think this might be the first time we've actually talked.
Yeah, yeah,
you know, so
that
yeah,
too.
very nice to meet you, Snake. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation. Yeah, informative and definitely I'd like to get more into the particulars of our individual politics as we move forward and get to know each other, but at the same time focus on our allyship against YEC and bad religious thought. I think that we'll always find common ground there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to start us off on a whole new topic, but I guess the one thing I wanted to talk about, or I just wanted to say is, I think one of the problems that is contributing to the rise of white nationalism is actually I think critical race theory is kind of inspiring a reaction in that sense. And they're going like, okay, you're going to attack my whiteness. Okay, I'll go full white nationalist. So that is one of the problems I see on the left.
Well, with critical race theory, though, the only people really talking about critical race theory are those on the right. Like when you're talking about critical race theory, what it is just a legal analysis of institutionalized racism. What happened in after the civil rights movement is everybody assumed that placing laws into place to bring equality for black people would work, but it didn't. And when it didn't, several theories were brought forth on why, and critical race theory is one of those. It's primarily taught in law universities as law theory, and it's not even really taught in most law universities, right? Like, you're not going to find it in every law class. It's not something that's prominent like the right wing is trying to put out. And they're utilizing critical race theory to talk about left wing cancellation, which I think is an issue, but they're just going about it the wrong way, and they're choosing this this theory that has a name that they can pick on, and misrepresenting it.
Yeah, I mean that is I didn't mean to get us off on a whole nother topic.
I just recently did a stream and looked into critical race theory, and I just started. There's a whole lot more I've got to get into on it.
I just am concerned about some of the racist kind of, it's like a socially acceptable racism that's on the left, and I think it's a big contributing factor to the racism on the right, because the right's always reacting to the left.
Well, I think that definitely the left is trying to be inclusive. And I think that often gets misconstrued by the right to be attack on whiteness, on white culture. People are afraid that white culture is going to be under attack. But that's primarily a fear of giving up power that white culture has always had here in this country. Anyway.
Yeah. Most of the left is reasonable about it. I think that issue with cancel culture is kind of like the average person is just kind of keeping their head down, trying not to rock the boat, because the radicals will come after them. Mm-hmm. And I do see that as a problem on both sides. So maybe we could talk about that in more detail in the future. But
yeah, I would definitely love to really get into that, especially when I'm at home and I have all of my notes on it. I can usually pull things from memory, but it's always good to have those notes to be like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to say right there, as opposed to like trying to pull it out of my ass. But yeah, no, I definitely think that, race politics goes on both sides. I think the left plays them just as much as the right. What I'm concerned about is backlash against diversity. And I think that that's just a natural reaction to a shift in power structure. If we can get past that and get to the real issues, then hopefully some change will come. Unfortunately, in this country, we tend to punt those major issues down for the next generation, which is something that I would like to see stop. We've got to tackle the hard issues, and we got to stop running away from them.
Mm. Yeah, and I completely agree with wanting to improve diversity. I do think that faux diversity, or kind of like political posturing for that, does damage to it.
Oh, so do I.
Yeah.
Like recently, I just came out. I was talking about the Skylar's fiction situation where people are calling him a white supremacist for a tweet he put out. Like, this dude is literally not a white supremacist. And when you call people like this a white supremacist, you're doing damage to the movement and to what we're actually trying to do in fighting white supremacy.
It really waters it down.
Yeah, it does. Like you can call me. You're gonna call me a white supremacist next because I believe in free speech and I'll talk to a neo-Nazi. So that makes me a neo-Nazi. No, it's me trying to understand, trying to get an internal critique so I can combat their ideology.
Yeah. I think his name is Daryl Davis. You know that guy?
Yeah. I've heard that name. Yeah.
The guy who, like, the most successful tactic for getting KKK members to deconvert was just to be friendly to them. He was a black guy who would just go and make friends with them, and they would know a black guy who was cool and who shared their interests, and they'd be like, and reality would conflict with the ideology that they'd been taught, that black people are animals or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they would deconvert.
I think he got something like 200 KKK members to come around and stop being KKK members.
Yeah. But yelling in their faces isn't going to ever make them put their hate away, really.
Yeah, and I do think that there is places for that. Like, sometimes, a Matt Powell or Steven Anderson, sometimes you just need to show that emotional outrage. I try to be selective when I do it. I admit, like, I fail sometimes. Sometimes I'm just having an emotional reaction and nothing healthy about it. I do think that there is times when that needs to happen, but at the same time that you're willing to go to that place, you should also be willing to stay in a medium, moderate place and just hear people out, or you're never going to understand it. And if you don't have an understanding, you're never going to be able to defeat it. You have to, Sun Tzu said, you must know the mind of your enemy. And you're never going to know that mind if you ignore it or cancel it or not give it the time of day to try to explain itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with the internet, there's just so much to learn about. So it can become overwhelming. And
no matter how much we learn throughout our entire lifetime, that's just an inkling of the knowledge that we could possibly attain. We're never going to know everything. We're never going to know close to everything. The smartest guy is never going to know close to everything.
Until Elon Musk perfects the neural link.
Yeah. Or we figure out how to live forever. Give us enough time, we could probably do it.
Yeah.
So I mean, this has been a great conversation, clarity, and definitely enjoyed every moment of it. Thank you for coming on, Snake. I enjoyed it. I enjoy watching your debates. And I won't talk smack about you being a Trumper anymore.
All right.
Awesome.
Cool.
So
mission accomplished.